Hi everyone, it's John. Welcome back to my channel. It is the first day of the new year, January 1st, 2023. Welcome to the new year. And on the first day of the new year, what I wanted to do in honor of kicking off Historathon 2023 was to give a list of possibilities for things to read for the next few months through the end of March for people who might want some ideas for stuff to go to. Some people I know are new to history, don't read much of it or any of it, and really have no idea what maybe they would want to look at. So this video is for you. And it also is going to serve as kind of a pile of possibilities video for me as well. Some of these books I'm more familiar with, some I'm less familiar with. But I have 16 books here. All fall in the time range of prehistory to the year 500. One of them, I think, goes beyond that quite a bit, but about half of the book is in the relevant time frame, and I'll get to that in a second. I want to say that it's important that this is not a reading list. We don't have a reading list for Historathon 2023. What we have are just chunks, blocks of time. So this is not what we are reading. These are just things you could read. As long as you read anything in the time period, you are participating in the event. It doesn't have to be any one of these. So that said, let me show you these 16 books. I tried to be as historically, geographically diverse as I could, and chronologically diverse too. I tried to get ancient history, I tried to get a little bit of early medieval, and different kinds of history as well, to maybe reach out to as many different kinds of interests that would be out there. But of course, you can only cover so much ground in 16 books. But let me get started. The first one is, let's see when this came out. It's from Alfred Knopf, and forget it. It is, I'll just show you the cover. It's Roman Jerusalem, The Clash of Ancient Civilizations by Martin Goodman. And it just tells the story of Rome bumping up into Jerusalem in the first century, the destruction of Herod's temple, and the aftermath. Okay. Some history that's a little, actually this author has 2 books in this set. This one covers a bit of the later history. This is Robin Lane Fox's Pagans and Christians. Religion and religious life from the 2nd to the 4th century AD, when the gods of Olympus lost their dominion in Christianity. With the conversion of Constantine triumphed in the Mediterranean world, one of those long, clunky subtitles that sometimes history books get. And this gives sort of the historical and theological through lines from the Greco-Roman world to Christianity and how those transitions went. So we think of Christianity as sort of being a different culture and a different thing than Greco-Roman paganism. This discusses a lot of the history, the ideas, the philosophy that connected the two and allowed one to transition from one to the other. This is the other book by Robin Lane Fox. This is from Basic Books, and this is his The Classical World, an epic history from Homer to Hadrian. And this is a pretty good survey of what you would want to maybe start with if you were completely new to the ancient world. It is a nice, thick book. It's about 550 pages, but it is also comprehensive in time. So we go all the way back to Homer. The first chapter is on the Homeric epic, and you end up with, basically Pompeii. So 1st century. It may go a little bit past. It goes to Hadrian. Yeah, as the title suggests, right? So not the end of the Roman Empire, but the height of it, at least, and all in 500 or 600 pages. So for someone who wants a nice just entry point for the ancient world, the Greco-Roman world, you get about 1,000 years of history here. So it's a nice place to start. Some of these books have these annoying price tags on them. I apologize for that in advance. I think it's kind of tacky, but also after many years of leaving them on, they tend to tear the cover art off when you remove them. So I'm choosing to not remove them. This is no, okay. This is The Restoration of Rome, Barbarian Popes and Imperial Pretenders by Peter Heather, who is also another wonderful writer on the classical world. This tells, I started this a couple of years ago and never got around to finishing it. It tells the story, if I'm not mistaken, of 3 people. Oh goodness, I should have looked this up first. It gives... Is it Theodoric, Justinian, and Charlemagne? It might be. Yeah, that's what happens when you don't do your research first. But here's another idea. This is from Oxford University. Here's an old book I found at a library sale. One of those fall library sales I think that we had in the end of October or something. So I showed it not too long after I bought it. This is Michael Grant, another name you're probably familiar with if you like ancient civilizations and ancient history. This is a survey of the ancient Mediterranean. Outside of Latin and Greece, I could use some reading material for some of those civilizations. This is, granted, an older book. It was published in, I want to say, 1969. So it may not be the most up-to-date introduction, but needless to say, you can always find more material in the back and more recent introductions later, but it gives a good, like I said, foot in the door, and that's kind of what this is all about. This is a beautiful book. Again, one I started earlier this year, and was reading this with Peg, and I think something came up, and for some reason we didn't finish it. But this is Peter Brown's book, Through the Eye of the Needle. Wealth, the Fall of Rome, and the Making of Christianity in the West, 350 to 550 AD. And this is also put out by Princeton. And this is basically just how wealth was perceived, the changing ways in which it was thought about, used, theorized, lived with in the ancient world, the late ancient world. Peter Brown, if you're not familiar with his name, may be one of the greatest living scholars of late Roman Christianity alive today. He, I think, is emeritus now, but was at Princeton for many, many years, 50 or 60 years. And he's now well up in age, 85 or 90, and as far as I know, still active. But he wrote an amazing biography, which would also be appropriate for this first quarter of reading of St. Augustine. And he wrote it in the late 60s. It is still, for my money, the definitive biography of St. Augustine, and probably will remain so for another 50 years. It is simply remarkable and accessible, and you don't often get that combination from a scholar. And it's just everything you could want in a book about Augustine. But this is one of his more recent books. This came out within the past. Yeah, this is from 2012. Next are two landmark volumes. The only two I own, unfortunately, and I really need to rectify that because they're absolutely fantastic, and you've probably heard them talked about here on BookTube before, and for good reason. I mean, they're scholarly, they have a lot of critical apparatus in them, they have appendices and lists of names to help you keep those straight. They also have amazing maps, diagrams, pictures. Let's see, what else do we have here? This and okay. Well, I'm not doing the best of job, but they also have like these little marginalia to elucidate points in the text, give you more details. Anyway, that's true for all of the volumes. I have two of the paperback versions here. This is the landmark Arrian, and Arrian's The Campaigns of Alexander. So this talks, of course, about Alexander the Great. And this is the landmark Thucydides. And this is Thucydides on the war between Athens and Sparta. And I don't think Thucydides needs too much detail here. But it's about, 15, 20, 25 years of that war. And I'll get to another book later that takes up where Thucydides leaves off. And that's another idea. I think if you're willing to, I was lucky enough to find these for a song for about $10 or $12 a piece. But to be honest, at full retail price, they are still amazing. And if you're interested in one of these, perhaps the best editions simply for the maps, if nothing else. Of course, you get everything else too, which makes it worth all that much more. But reading these stories without the maps sometimes is really tough, because we often don't know here in the early 21st century, we don't have that sort of cultural closeness to where all of these places are located. When you read Arrian or Thucydides or Herodotus of where they are. So seeing it on a map in big print, detailed, showing the movement of troops and all of that other stuff, it really helps elucidate things, clarify ideas, and just makes the reading experience so much more pleasurable. So here is another, I guess this is a 2-volume set, not just from the same series. This is Everyman, the Modern Library Classics edition of Plutarch's Lives. Again, I apologize for the price tag. This is volume 1. It is the John Dryden translation. And it gives you, of course, the entire conceit in Plutarch is to provide one Greek life, one Roman life, and then a short compare and contrast essay in which Plutarch sort of draws connections between the two figures and usually makes some sort of moral point or moral lesson. So, for example, you get Theseus and Romulus, you get Themistocles, Pericles, Alcibiades, Coriolanus, Marcus Cato, Lysander, Crassus. These are just some of the more famous names. But they are basically mini biographies. And since the heart of Roman historiography is moral fable, at least as I read it and I understand it, his ultimate goal here is to draw lessons from the past so we can learn from it. And that's what Plutarch's big goal is. But he's also just a great storyteller and a great biographer too. So this is volume 1. And here is volume 2. This includes, let's see if we can get a list of other figures here. This has Pompey, Alexander, Cato the Younger, Tiberius Gracchus, and Caius Gracchus, both of the Gracchi, Demosthenes, Cicero, Demetrius, Antony, Marcus Brutus, Artaxerxes, Galba, Otho. So some of the Roman emperors. Some of the comparative essays, by the way, have been lost. So, but the ones that we do have are included in the volumes. Okay, 6 more books to go. On the recommendation of Sean Standfast, who put out a video a year or 2 ago about really good books on Near Eastern culture, history, and archaeology. I tried to internalize all the books that he mentioned, and I don't know if I succeeded because I recently asked him for that video again because I couldn't find it. But I do remember him mentioning one thing. Saw this at a library sale not too long ago and jumped at it. This is Ancient Iraq by Georges Roux. And for anyone out there who doesn't trust my recommendation, Sean says it's a really spectacular introduction to the time period. So this is it's not prehistory, but it's quite early history. It's earlier than pretty much everything else I've shown. So if you like earlier history, Near East history, this is something you might want to consider. I mentioned earlier that I would pick up where Thucydides left off, and this is that book. This is Xenophon and A History of My Times. This picks up, like I said, with where Thucydides left off and continues the story for about another 50 years. For anyone out there who likes church history, specifically history of the Roman Church, I guess the history here doesn't really, that distinction doesn't mean much because there was no division during this history. This is before the Great Schism. But this is the first volume of the Penguin History of the Church, and they have a multi-volume set. This is the story of emergent Christianity from the Apostolic Age to the Dividing of the Ways Between the Greek East and the Latin West by Henry Chadwick, who is a superb scholar of early Christianity and also a very, very accessible writer. So if you're interested in learning more about your faith, or if you just love early Christian history like I do, then this might be something you want to read about. One of the many sort of sub-branches of history I love is the history of science and the history of technology. And I wanted to include this. Granted, it does go beyond, this was the book I was talking about earlier, it goes beyond the time period, but about half of this book stays before the year 500. So it takes you up from, the Greeks, the Romans, the late Roman Empire, right up to the very, very, very early Dark Ages, what used to be called the Dark Ages. And then everything after that is after the year 500. So this technically could satisfy two quarters of reading. This is the beginnings of Western science, the European scientific tradition in philosophical, religious, and institutional context, prehistory to AD 450 by David Lindbergh, a book from the University of Chicago. This is from the University of California, and it is The School of History by Mark Munn. And the subtitle there is Athens in the Age of Socrates. And the Age of Socrates, the very late 5th century, gives you a lot of fascinating people. Not only Socrates, but Herodotus and Thucydides and Sophocles, Euripides, Aristophanes, Plato, Xenophon. And this is basically just a discussion of the intellectual, political, cultural, social history of that, say, 1 or 2 generations of time in Athens. And it is pretty comprehensive for a beginner. It's not a super scholarly book, though it is written by a scholar. Excuse me. The actual text here, it's a shorter book than it looks. It's only about 340 pages. All of this is notes and apparatus. So it's not as intimidating as it looks, maybe. But for someone interested in maybe not the wars and and all of the battlefield stuff, but with more cultural history, political history, this might be something to be picked up. Last book. This is something I've had on my shelf for a while. Let me see when this was published. 2010. It is by Adrian Meyer. It's The Poison King, The Life and Legend of Mithridates, Rome's Deadliest Enemy. And this is the story of Mithridates VI, who was the king of Pontus. And we actually get a word in the English language from Mithridates, Mithridatism, which is why they call him the Poison King. He microdosed himself with various poisons so his body would be invulnerable when and if anyone ever tried to poison him. And the word comes into the English language, Mithridatism, for someone who tries to immunize, quote unquote, themselves from poison by drinking small amounts of that poison. Little factoid in case you didn't know that. So this is another sort of Near East history from Princeton University. And that's my last possibility. 25 minutes I'll take it. I've made longer videos. If any of these sound interesting, or if you're going to read something on your own and I didn't mention it here, let me know down below, or let us know in the Voxer group. I'm always fascinated to know what other people are reading. And I will see you later. Bye, everyone.